Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about 3 build ideas for Path of Exile 2's patch 0.3. Oh boy, was this an interesting patch. We first had the reveal where everything seemed pretty rosy, buffs across the board, and then you open the patch notes and you're like, what just happened? A slew of nerfs across the board, especially for archetypes that you wouldn't really think they deserved it. But I thought I would throw out some build ideas that we did over on twitch.tv/Palsteron. So once again, this is going to be one of those videos where everything we talked about on stream will be condensed in one video. Know that this is all theory crafting. We currently don't have the passive tree data, and we also don't even know the numbers of all the skills discussed here. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the first one, which is going to be Volcanic Fissure Warbringer. And this is a fan favorite of mine. This skill, I really tried making it work, but it sucked for a multitude of reasons. First up, you could not actually trigger the Volcanic Fissure. So if you don't know, you basically put down these fissures, and whenever you slam, then you would reactivate that fissure. So it would just pump again, right? But you couldn't really do that because the playstyle was just absolute cancer. You first have to put down all the fissures, and then you have to re-trigger it with a different clunky slam. Not really viable. But what you can do this patch is not only did they increase it to branching fissures, so you basically get more AoE coverage. No, the biggest buff is actually allied slams now trigger volcanic fissures. So this includes stuff like totems, or also companions, as well as other sorts of minions. So there's going to be some interesting stuff going around. Now, since they know this could be abused, these aftershocks can only be triggered 5 times a second. But you can imagine how you putting down volcanic fissures while your totems are slamming away and proccing them over and over and over is gonna be a big deal, because before that you need to put them down, then swap your skill, and while you're doing the other skill to proc your fissures, now you're not applying more fissures. Whereas if your totem does that, you outsource the proccing, now you can just keep spamming and spamming fissures. One thing people have pointed out is that these 2 extra branches do not count as separate fissures. So the 8 limit, if you don't know, Volcanic Fissure has a limit of 8. That should not be applied by the branches, and in the video they show that as well. They actually have 9 down. So with the branches counting, you can technically have 8 times 3 out at a time, and that's why in the trailers you see these like fancy explosions. On top of that, we have some other support skills that they put out this patch. First up, Forge Hammer. This is a hammer you throw out, and whenever you Warcry, you will explode that hammer. You'll see it right here, and these are all fissures. So they do not count towards the maximum. We've seen them put out multiple volcanic fissures with this on top. So yeah, I mean, it's going to look pretty impressive in a second, and as you can see, they get reactivated every single time. They don't really show it clearly with all the totems up and then proccing it over and over and over, but you will see in a second with another support skill, this gets pretty crazy. And that support skill is Ancestral Cry, and this one basically makes you into the embodiment of Chaos or whatever, and your melee strike and slams are ancestrally boosted, and your melee strikes trigger Volcanic Eruption. Huge, right? Very strong. But one of the most interesting things is that your steps are now slams, and they're basically triggering volcanic fissures. So you will see in a second him basically stepping over and just reactivating it over and over and over. And I think if your PC can handle this, it's going to be a sight to behold. Now, exactly how and with what supports you're going to use this is pretty much unknown. The reason I'm interested in this is because it has an absolute crap ton of AoE, which is something that, yeah, if you can't have the movement speed, you at least want the AoE. Now, one interesting thing about totems is that they have reworked them. They now use your equipped weapon, which if you don't know how you used to scale totems, they had their own flat damage and you scaled it with levels. So you had usually dual wielded with Giant's Blood, and you had 2 maces with +7, and you could actually get to level 40 in total with melee weapon levels. And yeah, pretty good, but overall, I will say that their damage hasn't really gone up. It has actually gone down a little bit across the board, but you can now actually scale your damage and their damage at the same time. So a lot of these totems will now kind of play a supportive role. For example, just increase your single target damage. But that is also a big buff for Volcanic Fissure, because the playstyle we just saw, you would be casting Volcanic Fissures and it would be your damage. All the procs would be your damage, but the totem still does a little bit of extra respectable damage instead of having completely different scaling. With that said though, one interesting piece of the puzzle here could be Ancestral Warrior Totem. If we're talking about proccing these Volcanic Fissures, or maybe even as a standalone, Ancestral Warrior Totems are probably the most interesting change out of everything. So They made it so Ancestral Warrior Totems now consume 3 endurance charges to raise a totem, but they have no maxima anymore. On top of that, they do quite a bit of extra damage, because don't forget, they are now actually scaling with your weapon. So there's a little bit more endgame potential, and you don't have to scale levels anymore, which a lot of people forget. Also means you're not going to have to pay like 1,000 mana per, so no more need to go blood magic and regen and whatnot. That is going to alleviate a ton of gear pressure and a ton of passive points put elsewhere. Now, don't get fooled by the footage though. While you can get a lot of endurance charges, I would be highly suspicious of this gameplay you're about to see. So he's going to put down 4 totem basically in sequence, which is currently not really possible. You cannot just get 12 endurance charges, and passively you don't really get them. So you will see 1 totem, 2 totems, 3 totems, and now you might be impressed. 4 totems. You might be impressed. You might be like, oh, that sounds amazing. There's no more limit, so maybe he can put down like 8, 9, 10. While I think that's possible without attacking in between, probably not. The way you would do it is probably something similar to what a lot of builds are doing currently with the Keystone Resonance. Now, there's a ton of issues with getting to Resonance, but more on that in a second. Let's say you have Resonance. Resonance makes it so whenever you gain a power charge, you actually get an endurance charge instead. And that means that, yeah, you're now getting endurance charges with the Red Flare Conduit. So you have to sacrifice your body armor, which is already a huge investment, but you get 20% chance to gain a power charge on hit. You can increase that with Corruption to 24. And yeah, that is quite a bit, right? Like, you're going to get them just extremely fast, especially if you're also using Serpent's Egg. The question is, will you actually need this Emmy? Maybe not, depending on how often you proc. So you could also put this in the mix with Volcanic Fissure. Think about putting down your totems, then they trigger your aftershocks on the Volcanic Fissures over and over, which should count as your hit. So it's going to proc the Red Flare Conduit chest over and over. Then you get more endurance charges, you put down more totems, and so on and so on. But just for people who are curious, I think the footage is either doctored in some kind of way, or it's like the passive tree. They usually don't doctor these footages. They're usually very real. So I'm assuming that they just got a lucky streak with Perpetual Charge, which has 35% chance not to remove charges, which is a little bit RNG. I don't know if you want to rely on that on your main skill, so it's a little bit uncomfy, but maybe they kind of prep the footage for that. And honestly, I can see this being quite strong, either on top of Volcanic Fissure or being its complete own archetype, but I think it is going to need quite a bit of gear and a few key uniques, so maybe not the best for League Start. Now, the biggest problem with this build is that it is probably the worst in terms of support on the passive tree right now, and in terms of archetype. They just nerfed Giant's Blood to half the amount of life you get. So Giant's Blood now has a lot higher opportunity cost. You could argue that this kind of activates possibly Dance with Death, have a lot more attack speed with more fissures faster. But on the other hand, let's be real, Giant's Blood was amazing. You get a 2-hander, you get a shield for free. Block got changed, sure. But this is a huge deal. Armor still didn't really get fixed. You probably still want to get some amount of evasion rating or path up to get energy shield. I'm not 100% sure. But there's a few things you can actually do to circumvent this. The first one is get Circular Teachings. Now, this you can only get from a Heroic Tragedy, which has Borana on it. So you get this Keystone. Strength's inherent bonus is 1% increased energy shield per 2 strength instead, which is not affected, at least according to this wording, by the halving of the life granted by strength, because you don't get any life anymore, you get energy shield. So you might actually get away with that, and you could start Warrior, somehow get a little bit of evasion, and all your increased energy shield would then come from Circular Teachings instead of having to grab it up top, which you would never be able to path there. But the other way to fix the problem might actually be Warbringer. Warbringer got changed quite a bit. If you look at it right here, now some of these changes are a little bit weird. The Answered Call notable got +1 to summon totems, which I'm personally not really sure why. They just reworked, and the, like, I don't know, flagship totem doesn't have a limit anymore. So it's like they want you to go Warrior Ballistas or something. You still have Shockwave Totem, sure, but still, Ancestral Warrior Totem was the big boy. This node did get buffed though, because one of the warriors now gives you 50% increased damage. And if you don't know, these like warrior, like whatever they call it, Ancestral Spirits also give you decreased attack speed. They give you global defense and whatnot. So they give you buffs, which is kind of nice, because in this build, Totems would kind of be the support role. But there's a lot more hype changes here. The biggest one is how they reworked Jade Heritage. Jade Heritage now makes it so you get stacks of Jade, as always, but they are no longer lost when taking physical damage. If you don't know how this works, gain a stack of Jade every second. If you're still from the past and you think this is like freezing you up, that has been changed already last patch. You can now move around, you get the Jade buffs normally. This gives you 1% PDR, physical damage reduction, per stack of Jade. So if you never press the button, which is encased in Jade, it basically just gives you 10% PDR. It stops at 10. But if you activate it, you are getting 6% of your maximum life per Jade consumed as guard. Now, that is 60% of your life as an extra shield. And this does not get removed on one hit like it used to. That got changed as well. And you don't lose the Jade stacks anymore, which was the biggest deal. Before, if you got hit, that's -1, and you would never really get to 10. It was incredibly, incredibly awkward. And it does have a duration of 5 seconds. Do remember that you can now support everything as much as you want, so you can throw more duration on anything, which means it's more going to be like 7 seconds, right? 7 seconds with 40% more. And then in the 10-second downtime, you still get the PDR. I think this is one of the strongest defensive nodes right now in the game, and it gives you a huge, huge buff to a otherwise kind of bleeding archetype on the left side. On top of that, Renly's training gets a quote-unquote nerf, which isn't really a nerf. So it now goes from 40% guaranteed to block to 35 base block. If you don't know what this means, is usually on a shield it says chance to block. That gets completely overwritten by this number no matter what happens. But block actually got reworked this patch, because block is now only 50% maximum. I think it's up top right here. Player, minion, and monster base maximum block chance is now 50% instead of 75. However, you can now block AoE hits without having to take Turtle Charm or anything like that. So it's kind of like a payoff similar to if you would take Acro on an evasion build. Now, is this a buff? Is this a nerf? Pretty hard to say, but I will point out that Turtle Charm also got reworked. So after this 50% block chance, what they did to Turtle Charm is this. You now always take 30% of damage from blocked hits, but your maximum block chance is back to 75. So as before, you're getting maximum block chance 75, but you're now also taking 30% of damage from blocked hits, but you don't have to get the extra block chance anymore. Now, this sounds like a nerf at first, and it kinda is, but there's one scenario where it's actually quite interesting. So the wording is you always have 75% maximum block chance, which means that Svalin's downside with minus maximum block chance actually doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. This roll doesn't matter. So for a League starter, technically you can buy any roll. It doesn't even matter. And if you do the math, so on 75%, if you still take 30% from the hits, you could say times 0.7, you only get 52.5% less damage taken. But with Svalin, you're actually going up to 94%, and at that point, you will be looking at a damage reduction of, on average, around about 66%. So couple this with the fact that Jade Heritage got buffed by quite a bit, more than you would think. On top of that, you still have stuff like Wooden Wall on the tree. If you're fire-based, there's actually going to be a new node that makes it so armor break applies to fire damage, so maybe Anvil's Weight is there. And don't forget that Warcaller's Bellow and Great Wolf's Howl are not one node, so maybe there's some abuse case there. And take the fact that Smith of Kitava just got kind of shit on with a lot of max fire res being completely removed from the game. And yeah, you're looking at probably the best Warrior Ascendancy defensively. With that said, though, armor still has jack shit for support. This is Volcanic Fissure really has me hyped, but it's something I'm not really sure I'm willing to do for a League start, and I don't know when I'm going to get this and if it's actually going to be good. But I just wanted to highlight Volcanic Fissure because I think it's now gonna be in a place where it has a ton of support, and some version of this is going to be pretty damn strong. But let's get into casters next, because there is some interesting stuff here, and it mostly revolves around Blood Mage and Stormcaller. Now, casters are getting a new mechanic called Infusion, and this is all around boosting your next attack. So, for example, you can pick up this small infusion, and then whatever you do next, if it has some kind of synergy with it, which a lot of spells now have, it will proc some kind of extra effect. Now, one that has me hyped the most is actually Firestorm, which got reworked to work with all 3 of these infusions, so lightning, cold, and fire. They have different effects, and oh boy, did it look crazy in the trailer, and the damage numbers could be outrageous. We'll have to see. But in terms of baseline, there are 2 skills that I'm really interested in, and it kind of revolves around the reworked Orb of Storms. Now, there will be a ton of different support, but that's not really what we're going to talk about, because before we see the whole picture, it's kind of hard to say. But what I wanted to start out with is Orb of Storms. So Orb of Storms can now trigger with any spell in its radius, not just lightning, which is quite a big deal and a lot less restrictive. It now creates a lightning remnant if all bolts are used up. So if you don't know, you plop down an Orb of Storms, and whenever you cast something, it zaps with the Orb of Storms. It has a particular amount of damage, and that damage got buffed by 85% more damage. A lot of you guys will point out that yes, but you can now only empower 8 of these attacks, only 8 zaps, and then it disappears. First up, not really a big deal, not that hard to resummon, especially with the less mana costs now. It used to be like more, sure, but how much are you actually going to cast? Also, using it up faster means you get that lightning infusion faster. And also, don't sleep on this base radius increase, which got increased from 2.8 to 3.6 meters. But all of that being said, how does that kind of tie together? Well, they just introduced a new skill that used to be, I actually don't remember what it used to be. I think it was on the staff. It's called Living Bomb, and this is the replacement for Solar Orb. Living Bomb is basically something you cast on an enemy, and whenever you deal enough damage on that enemy, the Living Bomb will detonate. Now that sounds clunky, right? So you have to first apply a Living Bomb and then deal damage with something else, and then the Living Bomb maybe explodes. But if you think about the playstyle, you plop down your Orb of Storms, and every cast of Living Bomb will proc the Orb of Storms, which then damages, and depending on how much damage it has to be in order to proc the Living Bomb, that's going to be the question, right? It could literally proc it and over and over and over, because remember, it's not just lightning skills. Living Bomb is a fire skill, but anything you cast will proc the Orb of Storms, so it should proc itself and kind of cycle. If anything, even if this is not like going to scale into late game, we'll have to see. The damage numbers seem very good, but let's say it doesn't scale into late game, it's still going to be extremely strong while leveling, especially because Living Bomb only has a cast time of 0.6 seconds. 0.6 seconds is quite damn good to proc it, and yes, you could argue, well, Ember Fusillade is 0.4 seconds, but then again, it's a lot less clunky than Ember Fusillade. But on this, we'll obviously have to see. All right, on top of what we just said, Orb of Storms gives you a lightning infusion, and Living Bomb gives you a fire infusion. What do you do with those? Well, as a payoff skill, you could use Firestorm. Firestorm, on first glance, you would think got nerfed, radius lower, less proc rate, right? But you can get all of that back and way more by having Fire Infusion, which doubles the size back to normal, creates 3 times as many bolts. So already, if you just consuming the fire infusion, it's already buffed to where it was before. And then cold and lightning infusions cost the storm, create additional cold and lightning bolts. We don't really know what this means, but we'll have to see. And then the damage overall also got adjusted. So my guess would be if you have all 3 infusions, it will deal around about double to triple the damage. And if you have no infusion, well, it's obviously quite a bit less. Now you might say, okay, so you're getting a fire infusion and a lightning infusion. There's actually a way to also get a cold infusion, which is the new elemental equilibrium keystone, which now causes infusions you create to be random elements. And you can store these more than just one, right? So it's not as clunky as you might think, because you're not always going to cast your Firestorm. You can actually charge it quite a bit. And so this will solve that. But on the topic of charging, we have to talk about the Stormweaver changes, because there is one node in particular here that would fit extremely well into what we just talked about. And that is that you now get +1 limit to elemental skills. If you don't know, Orb of Storms, technically you can only put 1 down. Firestorm, you can technically only have 1, but this one is +1 limit. You can also get this on Amulet, but Amulet is a huge opportunity cost. So if this all kind of fits together in a neat package, getting +1 to Orb of Storms and +1 to Firestorm at the same time would be huge. There's just 2 problems with Stormweaver. The first one is that the rest looks kinda, Arcane Surge node got extremely nerfed, and the payoffs for the remnants are kind of weak. So there is one node that got redesigned. Whenever you collect it's now this node. It's going to be this node. Whenever you collect a infusion, you have a chance to get one back 3 seconds later. Ugh. That sounds like not very nice. And the other one is weird. 50% chance when collecting a infusion to gain a different one. Which it's RNG, right? Like, I don't know if you really want to do that. It reminds me of the Amazon node with the infusions. Do you really want your main, like, attraction of your build to be inconsistent? I really hate how they did this. So all in all, I'm not 100% sure about Stormweaver. The other problem with Stormweaver is what they did to Blood Mage, which is now extremely strong and probably what I would play on this archetype. So Blood Mage was quite strong before, but in a weird spot, especially early mid game. It really needed a lot of gear to be good, mainly because Sanguimancy only worked to give you life remnants on crit, and it already took one of the Ascendancy nodes, so you could only take really 3 others, which means that you weren't able to take Crimson Power, which gave you a ton of life, and Sunder the Flesh at the same time, which is one of the strongest nodes in this tree. So basically overrides the crit chance that your spells normally have, which, for example, Living Bomb only has 7% base crit. Some of the others have like 10%, which you would now override with 15, which is huge. And now, guess what? Sunder the Flesh is now here. So it swapped places with Gore Spike, which makes a lot more sense. You first get the crit, and then you get the crit scaling, right? Ton of sense. So you can now take Crimson Power, Grasping Wounds, and Sunder the Flesh for 3 points. Gore Spike got nerfed to 1 crit damage bonus per 50 life. This node was never that important until end game. So for a League starter, it's actually way better the other way around, and you can still get crit damage from the tree or from jewels for the time being. But even more importantly, since you can take all of these nodes for 3 points, you can now also take some stuff in the middle, for example, the Leech. Now, being able to take all of these at the same time opens up Wrathpith Globe even more. 5% increased crit chance per 100 max life, and non-channeling spells deal 10% increased damage per 100 life. If you get like 5 to 6k life, that is absurd, right? That's multiple 100% of crit chance and 500+% increased damage. And all of this increased crit chance now works with the 15% base that you can take, and you really want all the life you can. So being able to take Crimson Power once again and Sunder the Flash is a huge deal. Now, yes, Blood Mage did get nerfed because of the overflow changes. You can now only have 50% more life over your life instead of 2 times, but I think overall the Blood Mage changes and how much more flexible it is, especially as a League starter, will actually, for the first time, make this a non-bait League starter Ascendancy. Now, build number 3 will be a crossbow build, and it's going to revolve around, once again, Explosive Shot. One of my favorites, the one I played in Season 1. You guys remember last patch, I actually played Glacial Shot, but the problem is this skill got absolutely nuked from orbit. We'll talk about that in a second. If you enjoyed that build, I'm sorry. It's going to be completely dead in the water. It got nerfed more than Lightning Spear, more than anything in this patch, mostly. For some reason, don't ask me why. But yeah, Explosive Shot stays the same, which is actually good. I'm very happy with all the changes, especially the crafting changes to essences and whatnot. Getting a good crossbow early will be so much easier. Plus, Shock Burst rounds, one of the strongest single target skills in the game, got a slight nerf with some huge QL improvements on the opposite end of that. And after all of that is said and done, there's also the new Mortar cannons that we have to talk about that might either be a new build around, depending on the numbers, or just a little bit support for extra single target. My Explosive Shot is still one of the my favorite skills that I've played in this game. The clear is just absolutely awesome, and we have to talk about some of the changes in this patch. First, reloading a crossbow and switching crossbow ammunition no longer reduces the player's movement speed. That is a huge deal. On top of that, weapon swap, actually, where is it? Weapon swap doesn't have an animation anymore, basically. It's now instant. There's no more weapon swap speed included, which means that if you're swapping between Explosive Shot and Storm Burst, you're just going crazy. Now, Shock actually got buffed. If you don't know, in order for Shock Burst rounds to do its full damage, the enemy needs to be shocked. If it's not shocked, you hit like a wet noodle, and you had to invest into like shock effect because it used to be 4 seconds and it was super awkward. You would shock with the Explosive Shot right here together with the 3 dragons, which makes it so fire damage can apply shock. And now you're gonna say, well, you can shock in other ways, but that was pretty clunky. Having your clear skill apply the shock felt so much better, especially against tanky targets where you didn't want to use a 3rd skill on top. But shock duration is now 8 seconds per default. So if we can, on top of that skill shock duration, it might be possible to literally, even if you don't have good gear, put down one shock and then just shock burst rounds them down to 0. And yes, I know in end game that's not going to matter. You're just going to absolutely eviscerate the bosses. I get it, but until then, this is so big. Do note that it's not all roses though. Shock burst rounds did get approximately 15% less damage taken for whatever it's worth. This skill, I mean, at this point, I think it's completely immune to nerfs though. The damage is still completely outrageous. Plus, we got something new for single target. Now, there's a new gem called Mortar Cannon. Now look here when it comes to Mortar Cannon. We don't have too much info here, but from what it seems like, the Mortar Cannon will be basically a totem that's supported by any grenade that you have. The grenade gets significantly increased cooldown reduction, whatever that means, and then it just fires over and over. So no charges or anything, it's just going to fire constantly. And you can kind of see how that looks right here. So it's going to do boom, boom, and just keep shooting. We don't know the damage numbers on this. This could just be single target support. This could be a complete build around, throw explosive shot out of the equation. It could be either way. In my opinion, they're going to balance it in a way where it's just a supporting skill. They want you to press extra buttons, but to be honest, having a passive damage source that you just put down while you do everything else is a pretty big deal. On top of that, if this does enough damage with certain grenades that have high damage effectiveness, this might be able to shock on its own, and you might not even need anything and just automate shock burst rounds on its own and just have enemies shocked without you having to press 2 buttons. As for Ascendancies, back then I went Deadeye, and I think I'm still going to do that. Remember that on crossbow it's a lot harder to get additional projectiles, so endless munition might just be the play, especially because this is also going to scale the grenade projectiles from your mortar cannons. But if it's not Deadeye, the only thing that I'm a little bit interested in is actually Weapon Master, which with how Weapon Swap now has no cost time whatsoever, you could do some freaky stuff with that. However, then your Mercenary and the rest of Mercenary doesn't exactly look enticing. Gemling Legionnaire got buffed, got changed a bit, I should say. But overall, it's probably going to be... Back then, there was no Amazon, so maybe it's Amazon, but might still be Deadeye. Now, I promise you Glacial Bolt, though, and this one is a little bit of a doozy. Now, on first glance, it might seem completely butchered because Ice Crystals now deal 80% less damage in the first 0.5 seconds of their duration. If you don't know, I'll put some gameplay in the background right now. But basically, the way I used to proc this is with a mark that actually deals damage, and then the Ice Crystals would shatter each other, which would happen instantly. So it's basically a one-button build, and it was great for clear. It was amazing. And that's not possible anymore because you're immediately doing it, but they want you to do it a little bit delayed. However, while leveling, this did also get 50% more AoE if shattered, which means that if you do it like we did it while leveling, which is put down a ballista, which then procs the walls, now all of a sudden you're actually buffed. And this was already a really strong leveling skill, so I'm assuming that most, if not all, crossbow skills are going to level like this, and I did already have a leveling guide, so yeah, that is actually great for the archetype. But that's about all I got for today. There's not really much more to say before we can actually see the passive tree. I will make an updated video about all the passive tree stuff once it comes out. They've said there's 150 notables coming, so that is going to completely change the game. Some of the Ascendancies, which we think have bad placement, might actually have good placement, so I will reserve my judgment until we see that. I just wanted to throw out some of the theory crafting we've been doing, once again, over on twitch.tv/Palsteron if you want to join. And yeah, once I know what I will play, I will make a quick video about it. Do note, though, that according to Local Identity, we're not going to get the passive tree info anytime soon, so I might go in semi-blind. We'll have to see if I have anything to say. Yeah, I don't know. You'll see it here. And with that being said, since I still have a slogan, see you next time.